All right. Hey, good morning to you. It's a brand new week, and it's a good day. This is gonna be a great week, I believe, in so many ways. We're celebrating a daughter-in-law's birthday tonight, and then Wednesday night I'm teaching at a church in the area, and I'll be doing that for a few weeks there. Looking forward to that, and then Thursday night I'm praying with my pastor buddies, and Friday we're heading to Atlanta to just hang out with our grandkids while our son and daughter-in-law go play a little bit. So it's going to be a great week. Going to be a fast week, I think, in so many ways. We launched a podcast last night on another thing that I'm partnering with in the area of just helping men get further along in life, and so excited about that. And got to spend the weekend with my middle son and his family celebrating Noah, our youngest grandson's birthday. And or not birthday, but birthday. So anyway, just a great time. And Grandparents' Day. I'm getting everything confused, man. We got so many things coming on. Birthdays are everywhere. Grandparent Day this weekend in Nashville. So big fun. And now we're going to settle in and look at some truth today. And we're in the book of Galatians. I love this. I love just going with you guys through the scriptures verse by verse. I love all forms of teaching the scriptures, no matter in what flavor it comes. I love to teach in whatever genre that there is. But there's something about opening up a sacred text and realizing that the whole world is going crazy, but there's truth within the pages of this book. And so that's why we do it. We're just getting truth. That's why I call it, let's jump into truth, because that is where it's found. And so we're in Galatians chapter 1. We looked briefly at verse 10 last week, but we're going to finish chapter 1 out today. It's Paul's testimony. We're going to see him talk in terms of breaks down really easy, right? There's his post-conversion, what he was like. There's the conversion that took place, and then his life after that. And he's doing this for a purpose. Paul and Barnabas had set out, and right after, as the Antioch church shipped them out in mission work, and they went through the region of Galatia, saw the gospel transform lives, established a church, and continued going. House churches really all over the place. And in the hearing of this, that what has taken place is the Judaizers. Those are those who don't want the Gentiles just to embrace the gospel without the works that they are determined to saddle them with. So you've got to be circumcised if you want to be saved. You've got to keep the law, the traditions of the Torah if you want to be saved. You have to honor the Sabbaths and the festivals and all the things that we do if you want to be saved. And so they're creating a works. This is the birthing and beginning of just legalism, the gospel plus works, and you see it permeate the gospel even today. Mostly among the Orthodox ranks, you see it very heavily like you would in this, but it's creeped into even evangelicalism as well, where there's a works-oriented aspect to this thing. And so Paul is determined to root that out. He calls it another gospel. It's poisonous. The gospel is not about your works and your effort. It is all about the grace of Christ that you and me receive by faith in that work. That's it. That's the gospel. And so then from that, the Spirit of Christ dwells within us and begins to work from the inside out. And so we do see fruit, the work of Christ, but it's from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that's the perversion of the gospel, that you and me must earn our salvation. And so this is what he's driving home. So what's happening, though, is he's getting reports back that these Judaizers are saying, "Oh, Paul's just doing that to win favor, just to make everybody like him. He's trying to remove all that stuff so that the Gentiles will go, oh, cool." And so they think they're saving Judaism, and Paul is like, "Man, you think that's what's going on?" And that's why he says in verse 10, after he just said, "Hey, listen, I'm telling you, if somebody comes and preaches that gospel, that Judaistic gospel that they're preaching, let them be accursed. It's a wrong gospel." He said, in fact, if I ever come and start teaching that stuff, let me be accursed. Whoever comes and brings that. If an angel from heaven comes and brings that silliness, let them be accursed. There's one gospel. And so Uh, Paul is determined about that. So now he's going to put to rest, before he gets into theology, he's going to put to rest his own character and testimony. And this is something Paul doesn't like to talk about. He'll say that. He said, man, I don't really like to talk about myself, but you force me into it. I feel silly doing this, but okay, here we go. That's what he said in some of the other letters that he wrote. But he comes to this one. And after he just said all that harsh stuff about being a curse, he said, so now am I seeking the favor of people? Now, do you think the Judaizers are going to believe that I'm seeking favor with people or God? Or am I striving to please people? If I were still trying to please people, I wouldn't be a bondservant of Christ. Man, if I'm trying to please people, I'm going to join them. But I'm not. I'm a bondservant. I willingly signed up to be a slave to Christ. That's what a bondservant is. A bondservant was one who had been freed of his slavery duties, but could choose to stay in that position for whatever various reasons. And if you did, you become a bondservant. That is a servant by choice. And normally what they would do is stick an awl, kind of a pointed deal, in your ear, pierce it, and then clamp it with a piece of metal. And you would know that you are a slave by choice, or by willingness, rather. And so this is what Paul is saying here. Or listen, if I'm a people person, man, I'm not going to do that. I want to chain myself to Christ, because when I do that, I know what's coming. Persecution, because people hate the gospel. They hate the gospel of Christ that says it's not by works that a man is justified, but it is by grace. For by grace you have been saved through faith. That not of yourself. It's the gift of God. We don't even get to boast about it. There's something in man that wants to do that, wants to feel like they've earned this thing. And so Paul says, man, they got me wrong. Then he begins to talk about his conversion, and this is where we jump into today. He says, for I would have you know, brothers and sisters, listen, I want you to understand something, that the gospel which was preached by me to you is not human invention. I didn't make it up. So he's making it clear on this. This message, he says, came straight from Christ. I didn't make it up. I'm not. These Judaizers want to make you think I'm just babbling a bunch of fairy tales. He goes, but I'm telling you, it wasn't human invention that did this. It wasn't some mind that created this. For I neither received it from man. No, nobody even taught me this. I know you're thinking that, I came from some branch of something and I'm just passing on what I was taught by some man in some seminary. No, he says, you're wrong on that. I wasn't taught by man, but I received it through a revelation of Jesus Christ. My gospel, the gospel that I preach, came from Christ. And so now he's going to begin to show that conversion experience. And so he's going to tell you what he was like before. And we've looked at this already, but it's worth seeing again. He says, for if you have heard of my former way of life in Judaism, when I was with those guys, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure, I tried to destroy it. Listen, the very thing I'm preaching now. Just a few years ago, I was persecuting them. I was seeking to destroy them. Listen to what Paul tells Agrippa. So the conversion story of Paul can be found in Acts chapter 9. That's in real time from the gospel from a chronological perspective. In Acts 26, he's before King Agrippa and he's on trial for his life. And he gives his testimony to King Agrippa in chapter 26. And so that's where we find ourselves right now because of what Paul said. I want to go there and I want you to hear from his own mouth what he says. So we get to verse 9. He's talking to King Agrippa. And he says, I used to believe that I ought to do everything that I could to oppose the very name of Jesus the Nazarene. He goes, this is what I was doing. Indeed, I did just that. I did that. In Jerusalem, I did it. Authorized by the leading priests, I caused many believers there to be sent to prison. I sent as many of them as I could there, and I cast my vote against them when they were condemned to death. Many times I had them punished in the synagogues to get them to curse Jesus. I wasn't convinced it was just I wanted them to curse Jesus. Crazy, right? I was so violently opposed to them that I even chased them down in foreign cities. And so he's going. So this is what he was, and he's telling the Galatians, man, I was a persecutor of the church. Now, he said, just to make it plain, he wants them to know I'm not just an also-ran. I'm not just some guy that, among a bunch of others. He says in Galatians 13, he says, and I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions. This is what he's saying. So listen, I I was persecuting them, and he said not only that, I was becoming more zealous for every little law that we should keep, every little tradition that we had. I was going to embrace that. I'm going to force that on everybody else. I was advancing far beyond everybody else. I was the leader of the pack. I was the gang chief, the chief of the gang. There was no one higher than I am it. This is what he's saying. He's saying, listen, I was just like these bozos that are out there doing this stuff to you right now. And so he says, I was all about rules and works. In verse 15, there's this great contrast. But, right? Man, when you see these in Scripture, they're always full of great truth. And so in verse 16 or verse 15, he says this, but when he who had set me apart even from my mother's womb and called me through his grace was pleased to reveal his son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. What's he going? Now, this is his conversion. What's he saying? God's sovereign hand was on me, right? He said, hey, so he tells King Agrippa, right after what we had read, he says, one day I was on such a mission to Damascus, armed with the authority and commission of the leading priests. About noon, your majesty, as I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. We all fell down, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will. And I said, who are you, Lord? And the Lord said, I am Jesus, the one whom you're persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and my witness. Tell people that you have seen me, and tell them that I will show you in the future. And tell them what I will show you in the future. And I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. What's he saying? Hey, listen, you just get up and tell them what you saw. And I'm going to teach you in the future. Don't miss that, because that's what we're going to come to in a minute. I will teach you in the future. Who's teaching him? Jesus. I will show you in the future what's going to take place. So who's going to be his instructor? Man? No, Jesus. That's what he just told King Agrippa. And so you remember that story from Acts chapter 9. Again, that was real time. So this is what he says here. Back in Galatians. I hope you're tracking with me. I'm just bouncing back and forth from the real stories in Acts to the book that he's telling about here. And so he says this, God's sovereign hand was on me. He set me apart. Listen how he says that, from my mother's womb. This is Paul understanding a sovereign God accomplishes his purposes in his people, and that from the womb to the tomb, God has a plan for us. And so this is what he's saying here. I've been set apart and I was saved by grace. I was saved, how? Through his grace that was pleased to reveal his son in me. It was the grace of Christ. That's why Paul tells the Ephesians, it is for by grace that you have been saved, not of works that you should boast. So this is his message. He was about all the works. And then he met Christ and realized, oh man, it's not about works. I'll never arrive at that. And then he says this, who revealed his son in me. This is that's the gospel there as well. The grace of Christ comes inside of us. And again, from the inside out, begins to transform us, to metamorphosize us, right? To transform us from the cocoon of a caterpillar to the butterfly that they become. That's what's taking place. And so Christ is revealing himself in him. He said, Christ was pleased to reveal himself in me for his glory. Listen, that's the whole process of sanctification. You and I were saved by faith in Christ, justified by grace. Now we are sanctified by the Spirit of Christ, who from inside out, Christ in me, the hope of glory, begins to reveal himself through me as I put off the old man by his grace, and the new man is put on by his grace. And so who I once was is not who I am now. What I once was was a sinner, full of vile. And now I am saved by grace, filled with the Spirit, and putting off the old man. And God's glory is being revealed to me. And he's going to speak of that as the fruit of the Spirit. That's how Paul's going to deem it in this very book that we're looking at now. That you will see love, joy, peace, patience, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control. That is the glory of God. When you see that emanating in a person, only God puts that stuff there. And so it is Christ in us, the hope of glory. And so now he comes to verse 16, and he's going to talk about his post-conversion. And so he says, let me make sure I'm in the right, chapter 1, verse 16. He says, to reveal his Son in me so that I might preach him among the Gentiles. I did not immediately consult with flesh and blood. Don't think that I got up off the ground in Damascus and started saying, okay, somebody needs to tell me what's going on here. He knew. He knew what it was. He knew who it was. He said, but I didn't immediately consult with flesh and blood. He says, nor did I go up to Jerusalem to those who were apostles before. So I didn't consult somebody around me going, what just happened? I didn't go to Jerusalem and go, hey, I'm going to need to meet with these apostles and figure out what's going on. I didn't go to them either. I went away to Arabia and returned once more to Damascus. What's he saying here? Because I went out to my own wilderness experience. Now, he's out there for 3 years. Then 3 years later, verse 18. So where was Paul? 3 years he's in Arabia. He goes north to Damascus from Jerusalem. And then he takes a sharp eastern turn into Arabia and finds himself in the desert area there, which is south of Jerusalem. But he went north to Damascus and then southeast into Arabia, and in that area for 3 years. I have to assume that's when Christ spent some time with him, showing him things. Now, he did have a heavenly vision. I don't think it lasted 3 years. But I believe that God was speaking to him for those 3 years that he was in Arabia. And that's what he's trying to make plain. I didn't meet with anybody. And then we get to 18. He says this, and 3 years later, I went up to Jerusalem to become acquainted with Peter, and I stayed with him 15 days. He goes, so 3 years later, 3 years after my conversion, he said, I finally found Peter. I wanted to see him, and I stayed with him for 15 days. That's a far cry from 3 years. In 15 days, he spoke with Peter. For 3 years, he's in the desert with Jesus. But I did not see another one of the apostles except James, the Lord's brother. This is an honest man. He's like, look, you want to think I got this from human people, but I spent 15 days with with Peter. And he said, and I did see James, the Lord's brother. Now, what I am writing to you, I assure you before God, I am not lying. And so he's making this plain to them that, hey, look, I'm not lying here. Then I went into the regions of Syria and Cilicia. So then he went back north to Syria, which you can see now on our maps, and then Lebanon, which is where Cilicia is. I was still unknown by sight to the churches. Listen, they knew my name maybe, but they didn't know my face. And he said, so I went to the churches of Judea, which are in Christ, but they only kept hearing, the man who once persecuted us is now preaching the faith which he once tried to destroy. And they were glorifying God because of me. He said, listen, past, present, and future, man, this is what in the past, I was just like these guys that are giving you a cursed gospel. I met Christ on a road by his sovereign hand. I knew who he was. I spent 3 years in the wilderness with him. He doesn't tell the Galatians this, but he had a special revelation where he was caught up into the third heaven. And he goes, I still don't know if was it real or was it a dream and a vision that God gave me. Whatever the matter, it was true. But now he's saying, hey, and so I didn't even consult with Pete. These guys are trying to look like I consulted with these guys, and that's where I got this stuff. I've gotten it straight from Christ. And he says, and I'm preaching this, and God's being glorified because I'm doing this. What's he saying? You ain't shutting me up. I'm not out here trying to hawk some man's ideas. I'm not out here trying to propagate some easy thing. I'm simply preaching the gospel of Christ, which is the Christ, the hope of glory in me. And he got there through grace, by faith and nowhere else. That's the gospel message that Paul gave. And so, man, tomorrow we're going to flip the page to chapter 2, and we'll see him jump into some crazy good stuff. Can't wait to share that with you. He's gonna take us to a council, and we're gonna have some great times there. Lord bless you guys. Have a great day, and Lord willing, I'll see you in the morning.